When it comes to excellence, there's really only one name that comes to mind, and that is Tom Peters. And Tom's been a guest here before on Timeless Leadership, and yet I thought it was important to have him back with his latest book, Tom Peters' Compact Guide to Excellence. It's really assembling his life's work under a single cover. And if anything, I think Tom's final section in the book, which was put together by Tom and designer Nancye Green, the final chapter is Excellence is in the Next 5 Minutes. And I think this provides us a good sense as to where we're heading in this conversation with Tom. Tom writes, "Excellence is not aspiration. Excellence is not a mountain to climb. Excellence is the ultimate short-term strategy. Excellence is in the next 5 minutes. Excellence is in your next 10-line email. Excellence is in the first 3 minutes of your next meeting. Excellence is listening. Really, really fiercely, aggressively listening. Excellence is in sending flowers to the hospital where your top customer's mom is having major surgery. Excellence is going out of your way to say thank you for something small. Excellence is in pulling out all the stops at warp speed to respond to a minor screw-up. Excellence is adding a final touch to a final touch to a final touch. Excellence is in the next 5 minutes. Or it is nothing at all." I hope you'll join me in this conversation with Tom Peters, which is the final episode in Season 3 of Timeless Leadership, as we explore what it truly means to be excellent. Have you ever admired a leader and wondered just what it is that makes her who she is? How he came to embrace the things that advanced him? Welcome to Timeless Leadership, where we look at the principles that define success. This is a show for leaders at all stages of their careers who aspire to understand what it truly means to be a leader. And who is a leader? Dolly Parton said, "If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader." Together, we'll explore key principles, not only in the sense of fundamentals, but also in the ethical sense, the habits, character traits, and virtues that form the backbone of leadership. Principles that are just as relevant and essential in the 21st century as they were in the first century. This is Timeless Leadership. Tom Peters has been chasing excellence for 4 decades. He received his bachelor's and master's degrees in engineering from Cornell and his MBA and PhD from Stanford, focusing on implementation. Tom worked at McKinsey & Company from 1974 to 1981, becoming partner in 1979. He co-founded their organization effectiveness practice, and in 1981 he left to found his own consulting and advisory firms. With 19 books to his name, Tom has been honored by dozens of associations for his content on management, leadership, quality, human resources, campaigning for more women in senior leadership positions, customer service, innovation, marketing, and design. He's been summed up by Nancy Austin as a human exclamation point. And if you've never heard him speak, Tom Peters is what would happen if Dale Carnegie, Peter Drucker, and Red Bull had a baby. And his latest book is Tom Peters' Compact Guide to Excellence. Tom Peters, welcome back to Timeless Leadership.
Thank you. Thank you for the return invitation, which is always a good sign in life, right?
Well, I guess so. And you're part of a select few that have this ability. You know, I was under the impression the last time we talked that that was going to be it, because you had billed your last book as your last book. What happened?
What can I say? Actually, what happened is kind of interesting, but I won't bore you to death. The spine of the new book says Tom Peters and Nancye Green, and I worked with Nancye on the prior book, and she's a designer, but with a capital D, considered one of the top designers in the world, for heaven's sakes. And so we got, my books have always been driven by quotes. I will talk about something that Richard Branson says, and then I'll give you 900 words, which are my explanation and what you ought to do about it. But, we just got to talking, and there are some really top of the line quotes in there. We decided to build the book around that, and it would bore the living bejesus out of you if the designer had been normal or subnormal. But Nancye did a beautiful job. She brought it to life, and so I didn't have to do any original research between the past book and the current book. But it still always takes a lot of work. But we're really happy with it. I mean, I've been a design freak. I'm an engineer by training, so I don't even know how to spell design. But I've been a design freak for probably 20 years, and maybe even longer than that, because for a teeny weeny bit of time, I consulted to the Steve Jobs Apple. And this has just ramped it up another notch. I was ready, but the look, feel, taste, touch, smell of this book is different, and it is the book. I was writing a special acknowledgement for Nancye at one point, and I thought, what bullshit? She's not somebody who helped me with this thing. This is her book. I mean, put her name first, for God's sakes. And she's a true co-author, a true partner, and I think it's a great advertisement for good design.
100%. I mean, both of your names are well regarded in your respective industries. So bringing them together, I think, is a masterstroke. And what struck me is, as we look back at your scores, well, not scores, maybe 18, 19 books that you've done.
I think this is number 20, but
a lot.
Yeah.
And we look back to, say, your third book, which was a 900 pager. I mean, really dense stuff. And then we've got this compact guide. And I was thinking about it, just in terms of the current culture, how things go and how hurried and harried people are. This is a wonderful way of grabbing people just a chunk at a time, asking them to engage, disengage, pick it up, put it down. And that seems to me to be very much in line with your kind of design mentality. But also, the last time we talked, you had a sense of, urgency about your message, that, you've been banging this drum for 40 years on humanism and excellence. And you really felt that you're in a hurry to really kind of get this last bit out. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, two things. I'm not as young as I used to be, so I haven't got another 40 years. But and let me say this exactly right, because I don't want to sound arrogant. I do not think that I can fix the world. But as we've gone through this despair of the last 3 or 4 years, my message, which is kind of overstatement, is more important than ever. I'm working with a colleague, Kate Bennis, right now, and we're talking about a podcast. And kind of this is rough. We're saying 2080 to 80-20. And the Gallup research says 20% of people are engaged with their job, 80% are. And we've said, what if we could flip that number? Because my hypothesis is, unless you were born rich, you're going to work a long time. And so the work is your life. Like it or not, you're going to, as I've said to people, you spend more time at work than God, you adore your family, but statistically, you're going to have more hours at work than you will with your family. So don't piss it away. And I don't think this book will change the problems, but kind of my feeling is that if people were more engaged in work, they would be less likely to be suckers or victims of relatively or totally extreme messages. Just a rough hypothesis, A, and B, as I said, I ain't telling you I'm going to fix it. I said to somebody one time, the difference between me and Tony Robbins, other than he's taller and better looking, is that if Tony Robbins goes and speaks to an audience of 1,000 people, he expects 1,000 people to walk out of there with a new look at life. If I speak to an audience of 1,000 people and 4 people walk out and they are really determined to do something differently, I say, holy shit, that was a great day. And so you do it by pennies, not by dollars.
Yeah. And I think that, that notion of 20/80 to 80/20, I mean, that's a goal. I mean, getting the 80 would be ideal, but to your point, we got to get there stepwise. And I have to imagine, as someone who's been talking about this stuff for decades, that you've gotten frustrated over time, or maybe you get tired of beating the same drum all the time. Is that the case?
Well, looking back, I get tired of 2,700 speeches and roughly 2.5 million frequent flyer miles. At some level, because the messages aren't complex. I said to somebody, if you want to, I said, I've got 4 degrees, but if you want to understand what I'm writing, you must show me a signed certificate of completion of the 4th grade. Because, these ideas about engaging other people, helping other people grow, does not require a PhD or a master's degree or a BA or a community college degree. It really, really doesn't.
It's not rocket surgery.
It's not rocket surgery. Yeah. It's 2 things. I'm frustrated as hell, but I love the stories. I said to somebody, we were talking about something, and they said, what's your favorite quote? And I said, well, it comes from the late movie director, Robert Altman. And his quote was, the role of the director is to create a space where actors and actresses can be more than they have ever been before, more than they have ever dreamed of being. Now, in my view of the world, and you and I can talk about this, I feel the same way if you put me in charge of a 52-person housekeeping department and a 300-room hotel that you were CEO of. It's about individual growth, individual engagement, individual learning, and it's not about Hollywood stars or, top orchestra players or what have you. And so frustrated, yes, and not, well, obviously, anybody who reads the news today and is hopeful, I wonder about them. But I don't know. I'll keep plugging, and I like the good stories, and maybe I should be more frustrated than I am. But anyway, that's as good an answer as I can give you. I think it's a very great answer.
Well, I think it's a testament to your belief, to your dedication, to the, as you say, the simplicity and the resonance of the message. It is timeless, and as you know, here at Timeless Leadership, we are about messages that are as well regarded in the 21st century as they were in the first century.
Absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
This is human nature. It makes great sense. And to me, that speaks volumes to me as a former classics major, when you get to the point in the book where you say higher liberal arts majors.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Sociology and history and English and philosophy, all these things that help people understand the human condition. I mean, anybody can learn accounting, anybody can learn finance, but it really takes dedication and passion to make sure that you understand the human condition.
I totally agree. And to pick up on the that little section in the book, one of my great friends, and whatever it is I do, he does it probably even better, is Henry Mintzberg, Canadian management guru, to use that wretched term. And I don't think he did the study. I think he found the study. But technical graduates, like engineers, got twice as many job offers at roughly twice the starting salary as you classics majors at the age of 21. By the 20 years on, you had left them in the dust. And, I've talked to people and engineers and so on, and I can, have a unique opportunity because I am one. If you're a good engineer, within 6 months, 9 months, certainly 1 year, you're going to be heading a project team. And the minute you head a project team, your life has flipped 180 degrees. Your entire goal is to make other people better and more engaged. And that's what you do for the rest of your life. And if the liberal arts folks are a little behind at the start, once the people thing kicks in, if you will, you're a hell of a lot better trained than I am with my master's degree in civil engineering. I'll tell you an example of that. My parents didn't have much money, and the Navy paid my way through college. And when I went in, I happened to go in at exactly the time the Vietnam War started. And I was a civil engineer, and so I ended up in Vietnam as with a battalion. I was a very junior officer. I finished my tour of duty, and God, it was cheeky. I went back to happened to be the assistant dean of the engineering school that I had gone to. And I walked into an office, and I looked him in the eye and I said, "You screwed me." When I landed on the beach in Vietnam, anybody who knows the Navy knows the chief petty officers do the real work. I was a junior officer, and I was technically in charge of the lives of 15 people. And my leadership training at the great Cornell University Engineering School was zero. And I'm still pissed off. It's 50 years later. To be a little bit fair, Cornell and probably most other schools, the engineers were incredibly arrogant. We knew that we were better than you damn classics people. And if we had to take a classics course, we said, "Oh shit, this is a semester when we got to do the damn psych thing or the history thing." So, but really, I think the most important point about what I said, within 9 months, if you're a smart person, you're going to be running something, and then it's all people.
I'll tell you a story. I worked with Alan Mullally at Ford, engineer by training, but probably one of the best leaders in the business world of the last couple of decades. He told a story of when he was an engineer, young engineer at Boeing, and he was given his first direct report. And he sent the guy back over and over again to redo his work. And it wasn't exactly the way Alan would have done it himself. And finally, after like the 37th try, the guy said, "Look, Alan, this just isn't going to work out." He said, "What you're trying to do is create another you. And what you need to be doing is helping me create a better me." Right. And Alan thought his head was going to explode at that point because it finally hit him. And the guy moved on. Right. Alan wasn't able to train him. But that's when it became apparent to Alan that it's not creating your own likeness. It's helping people achieve their own greatness.
That is so fabulous. I read something kind of associated with it, which is a bit different and a bit the same. The guy who runs Charles Schwab, if it isn't Charles Schwab, it's that level of organization, said he owes his career to one thing like that. And he was a 4.0 student, and if possible, a 4.1 student. He had a perfect record. He was near graduation. I forget what the course was, but there was a final exam. And the final exam had all the equations and charts and graphs. And the last question on the exam was, "What is the first name of the woman that cleans this room?"
Holy moly.
And he blew it. He ended up with a B in the course, but his 4.0 went to 3.98. But he said it's not unlike Mullally. He said that was the most magical moment in my career. And he said, you better believe in our enormous company. I know everybody's first names, but there really are those kinds of singular experiences. We all wish there were more of them.
Yeah. And I mean, this really gets to the heart of what you've said for many years. Hard is soft, soft is hard. Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, again, we share that same engineering background. And so the hard is soft, soft is hard, just in simple words. Hard is the spreadsheets. Hard is the process maps, etc., the org charts and the like. Well, they really are the soft stuff. They are completely abstract. They can be manipulated. Remember the derivatives-based crash that we had, 10 or 12 years ago? It was all incredibly sophisticated math, except there was nothing at the bottom. There was no house and nobody who could pay the loan. And so that really is the manipulable, abstract stuff. And we call it the hard stuff. The soft stuff, which you and I have just been talking about, is the kid who finally gave the finger to Mullally after the 38th try to get this thing right. It's about the Charles Schwab guy who didn't know what the heck the name was. That's called soft. And that's the real bedrock of an organization. I mean, when we did the In Search of Excellence thing, people weren't even talking about the word corporate culture. But, there's nothing, quote unquote, harder than a corporate culture. It's the bedrock for everything. It's like the family values that your parents taught you.
Yeah. And part of that, I mean, either it's, kind of imbued in you from your earliest days, or if you're motivated enough, you can learn it from the colleagues and the culture in which you sit. But here's a conundrum to me and probably to many people. And I think this is why there's probably some stumbling blocks with the hard numbers, with the accounting, with the financial results, et cetera. Those are easy to measure. Right. When it comes to the soft stuff, when it comes to making people feel better and morale and things like that, how do you quantify success in those areas?
There's a wonderful book that came out, and I hope to God, for those who like the idea, I'm going to come close enough. It's titled The Metrics Trap. And it is a well-written, well done, and so on. And it's all about an answer to your question. You're right. And so I'm going to give another evasion and give a precise answer. I was giving a speech in Mumbai, and sitting that far from me in the first row in uniform was a 4-star general who apparently ran the Indian Army, which happens to be, in terms of number of bodies, the biggest in the world. And we got to talking about this, that, and the other. And, he's a little stiff, so we didn't hear much from him. But I started talking about promotions. And this was like what's the first name of the person who cleans the room? He said, Tom, you and Joe Smith are the 2 final candidates for a promotion to general. And that's a pretty big deal. He said, I am not interested in any of the conventional measures associated with what you've done. What I'm going to do is, with help from others, I am going to dig through the organization and find the people who have worked for you in the past and find the degree to which they grew as individuals because of those 2 years with Tom Peters. And I was standing there just, shaking when he said it. But, it's not a measurement. It's not a numbers thing. I mean, I guess you could translate it that way, some level. Same thing at a much more junior level that a friend sent me. There was a youngster who graduated from the Naval Academy. He went to his first ship, which was a supply ship, and had his first meeting with the commanding officer. And the commanding officer said, "You're well trained. The job you're supposed to do, I will assume you can do very well." He said, "What I'm going to look at is what happens with your sailors. How many of them take some additional education courses? How many of them get promoted in military terms from E1, which is the bottom, to E2, which is the next little step up?" He said, the quality of the growth of your sailors is my measurement, not that you put all the boxes on the right shelf. And so I'm not sure it is that it can be directly translated, but you sure as hell can translate the generals thing when Tom Peters comes in and wants to be, you got an opening for a first line manager. And when Tom is, one of the candidates, you can find out, you can talk to the people who worked with him.
Yeah. And as you say, that takes a little work, right? It's not easy.
It takes a lot of work.
It is hard, right? And that's the point. If you're really invested in this stuff, you'll make the extra effort to ensure you're actually digging to find the things that matter. And I think, this notion of people promoted, even people who have moved on from the organization. Ultimately, a leader is, committed to their craft enough that they want to develop people so that they can go out and fly on their own, right?
And I've talked to some people in my old days in Silicon Valley, and when you go off and start a company, and suddenly it's $100 million company, that is the day that I have, 2 extra sips of wine or whatever it happens to be, because that's the ultimate win. And yes, I totally agree with you in that regard. The people who left and went on to better things is a complete win.
Yeah.
There's another thing that's in the book, stolen from the New York Times, and the columnist David Brooks, which is at least somewhat related to this. He wrote a column and he contrasted resume virtues and eulogy virtues. And the resume virtues are the degree you got, the promotions you had, maybe even your net worth, whatever the heck it is. And the eulogy virtues, obviously, are what do they say about you at your funeral? And 99.9% of the stuff they talk about at the funeral is what kind of a human being was he? How much was he involved in community service, et cetera? And I think the eulogy v. resume holds as much in that housekeeping department we talked about a few minutes ago as it does, any place else.
So it would not be a Tom Peters conversation unless I got you to talk about Milton Friedman. And here's the opportunity, because I think it links directly to what you're talking about. In 1970, Milton Friedman probably did some of the most lasting damage to our capitalistic society when he focused on shareholders. And I think we've seen a swing, and I don't know if it's stuck or not, where we talk now about stakeholders rather than the shareholders. When we think about long-termism and short-termism, and we think about the hard numbers versus the soft skills, this is kind of where Friedman is the white-hot center of all this that gets your ire up. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, a couple of things. Yes, the Friedman thing in hard numbers that make me want to throw up. When Friedman wrote his piece in the New York Times in 1970, first of all, it had a sentence or two that said, corporations have no requirement to add social value, period. That's not their job. They're there to make money. And so that's enough. But when it was written, 50% of profits, this is Fortune 500 companies, 50% of profits went to shareholders, executives, et cetera. And 50% went to people, R&D, and the like. My old, now discredited significantly, friends at McKinsey redid that study in 2014. So we're talking about 44 years later. And that 50, I can't even say it in a public setting like this without 83 swear words that I learned in the Navy. In 2014, 91% of profits went to share buybacks, executive salaries, shareholder bonuses, and 9% was left for the people. but to come back to the kind of the first paragraph of your question, and once again, it is McKinsey data. They did a study of 600 big companies, and it was McKinsey, so you can assume that the assumptions were hard as a rock. The long-term performers wildly surpassed the shorties over even something as small as a 10-year period. And they passed them on profitability, they passed them on growth, and one thing of great importance to us today and every day, they wildly surpassed them in job creation. The big 100 does not create jobs, it loses jobs.
I think this speaks to our need that we've been so trained away from to focus on long term. Right now it's, what are your quarterly numbers? Are you hitting your numbers? And it's all hard number based. And what are you doing for Wall Street? And Wall Street will punish you if you aren't hewing to the 90-day window. And the world doesn't work that way. I mean, there are certain wild swings that we see when catastrophic events happen, the pandemic, or, an idiot taking over a social network. Those things happen quickly. But I think for the most part, like the genius of Jeff Bezos at Amazon is to kind of hold off the board for decades and say, we're not going to be profitable because we're building a long-term vision. That level of patience we hardly see anymore. No. What do we need to do to get back to that?
Well, I want to put one big asterisk. And I'm a guilty party, and 90% of the people who are called that terrible term, management gurus, are a guilty party. The good news is that only 7 or 8% of us work for the Fortune 500. Doing the advanced math, that means 90% don't. And I've kind of avoided that and didn't think much about it. And 5 or 6 years ago, I really got engaged with the SMEs, the small and the medium-sized enterprises. And yes, there are a lot of wonderful 2-person companies that somebody started, but when you look at that 50-person, the 75-person, the 100-person, the 150-person company, there are a lot of superstars who do this thing right. We looked in my next to last book at a company out of Seymour, Connecticut called Basement Systems, Inc. And what they do is turn moldy, musty basements into a family rec room or an extra bedroom or what have you. And they treat their employees like gods, and they've grown to be $100 million companies. Those are the companies I want to really put my arms around. So there's a lot of good news out there. It just doesn't happen to make it into into Fortune magazine or Forbes magazine. So that's the best part of the story.
Yeah. I love hearing stories like that, particularly on the small side. I mean, and if you can replicate this times the, hundreds and thousands of small businesses like that out there, well, there's got to be some kind of, effect of movement, of momentum that we'll see out of that.
Yeah. And I think Tony Robbins or me or 10 other people or the right books on your shelf, I think you and I can get to a 29-year-old who started something and she now has 9 employees on the payroll. I think they are malleable when it comes to messages about how they drive the company. I would, those are my eulogy virtues. I want the people who ran the 10, 20, 30, 50 person companies who said, holy shit, Peters is right. For God's sakes, let's stop beating people up because they've gone through 37 tries and still made a mistake.
Yeah. And in some ways, you're almost in a better position in 2022, 2023, because I think there's so many people, particularly younger people, that are looking to be connected to jobs, to companies, or founding jobs in companies that have purpose. We hear purpose as almost a buzzword, and yet for you, purpose has been kind of that through line that you've
Yeah.
had?
Well, I think there's an additional thing I would add, and that's the conversation we're having right now. You had to read Forbes or Fortune or Business Week or what have you X number of years ago. Now you've got a choice of a significant number of podcasts talking about this stuff. And if she or he, the small business person, was energetic, they'd probably see if they could go after a few that would be. And that's just an amazing difference in the availability of good examples, good discussions. And, I think we're having a pretty good discussion. We ain't alone. And that's a big deal. And there are a lot of people, I'm sure a fair number of your friends who do, they're not, some are podcast addicts, but there are a significant number who have a couple of favorites and so on.
Hey, folks, if you've made it this far through the show, drop us a line and let us know you've heard what Tom and I are talking about. That would be a great reward. Tom, this kind of circles back to some of what you were talking about before with respect to that knee-jerk reaction to Friedman. Now we hear, again, with buzzwords, we hear a lot about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We hear about ESG, environment, social, and governance. I see so many people out there combating this notion of wokeness. And to me, being woke means nothing more than being aware of and sensitive to the needs of other people and to bring them along. And they say woke is broke. If you want to stay woke, you're going to go broke. And to me, everything we've been talking about here, these soft skills, the focus on the long-termism, that's essentially wokeness. And you just said, out of McKinsey's study from 2014, they prove that you don't go broke if you focus on that kind of stuff. What are your response to some of these more trendy terminologies that kind of reconfigure what you've talked about?
Well, I would have said the same thing you just said. So my answer is ditto. I have no idea what your politics are. But to me, woke is handing the bad guys a softball. It's become that kind of a word, but everything you said, yes, what we're talking about, for 20 years, I've been writing about the fact that women tend to be better leaders than men. And certainly as we've, watched things unspool in the last few years, as you just said, and as McKinsey said, woke works, in fact. And we don't need the buzzwords. My buzzword is, damn it, I'm going to give you 5 years to have more than 50% women on your board of directors. And there was a wonderful thing. I think it was at some point when we really were when we had the burst of energy around equality and so on, there was, I can't remember the guy's name. He headed an investment company and he had a big ad in the Wall Street Journal. And it was directed at somebody or other. And he said, you've really said some good things. Will you please send me via email a photo of your executive team? And I must have, I hate to use such foul language. I must have peed my pants for 5 minutes when I read that. And, there's a hard measure, if ever there was one.
Yeah,
but yeah, we're on exactly the same page. We don't need the buzzword. This buzzword, as I said, I think has been helpful to people I really don't want to be helpful to. But all the numbers say, no, if you do the shareholder value thing, I'm willing to admit that next quarter you may beat me with the numbers. But I will tell you, if I've got the right kind of board, that I will beat the crap out of you within 2 years or 3 years or certainly 5 years. Because this stuff we're talking about with the people stuff is not long term. It is not tomorrow morning, but it is the day after tomorrow. The movement starts pretty immediately. And that, so it's not long, long term is what they prove, but the long term comes, you can see it, as Mullally did when he started treating the kid differently. It didn't take 6 days or 6 hours, basically.
And here's the thing, repeating it and talking about it, it's important. I mean, you need to talk about your values, but you also need to live them at the same time. You need to put them into action. And I guess that's, where the book opens, we kind of come full circle here, is that strategy basically is overrated. And I know I'm putting words in your mouth. I'm condensing it a little bit, but
no, you're not.
we talk about strategy a lot. It seems to get, that marquee feature, and yet it really isn't about strategy, is it?
No. If I were honest, which I'm willing to be, the reason we're having this conversation is because I co-wrote a book called In Search of Excellence in 1982. Why did I write it? I wrote it. It was funded by McKinsey. It was a McKinsey study initially, and then I left and my co-author Bob Waterman stayed. But I was called in by McKinsey's new managing director, Ron Daniel. And I had just finished this PhD in organizational behavior at Stanford, and he'd heard some good things about me. And he said, in short, and I'm just repeating your language in a way, he said, we, McKinsey, generate incredibly brilliant strategies for our clients over and over again, and then they can't execute. Tom, what the hell is going on? And so that's exactly, what you described 90 seconds ago. My favorite quote in that regard is attributed to several people, but General Omar Bradley, who commanded U.S. ground troops on D-Day. And the Bradleyism was, oh Christ, I've got to get it exactly right. Oh, it's awful. I'm old. But the basic point was the typical person talks about strategy. The winners talk about execution. When you're landing on the beach at D-Day, the most important thing is that the box of ammunition shows up on the beach before the soldiers get there. And that's the boring stuff, but it's the winning stuff.
I'm a sucker for quotes too, Tom. Every issue of my newsletter, Timeless and Timely, I start with a quote, and I typically pepper it throughout with other quotes from historical and literary figures. And related to this one, my favorite is from Henry Ford. And he didn't talk about strategy, but he talked about vision, which is ostensibly the same thing. And he said, vision without execution is hallucination.
Oh, I love that.
Right?
I mean, it's a good start and a wonderful finish with hallucination. That's great. I found the quote, by the way.
Oh, what is it?
Amateurs talk about strategy. Professionals talk about logistics. And, that's your... there's a thinking of Henry Ford and his ilk, and I've never gone to quote.com to check it out. But there's an Andrew Carnegie equivalent, and the Andrew Carnegie sort of equivalent is, I owe my success that I always hired people who were better than myself, and that's same drawer that one comes out of.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, because when you think about coming out of World War II, Henry Ford was about at the end of his life. He died in 1947. Coming out of World War II, you had this amazing group of, I guess they were Army Air Force veterans called the Whiz Kids.
Yeah.
Applied to a bunch of different Fortune 500 companies. And Ford was the last one on their list and finally said yes to them. And brought them in, and they were all logistics geniuses, right? And they did exactly what we would have thought they would have done. They focused on the execution. They focused on the hard numbers. But again, that's all they were focused on because that was the right time to kind of make good of this boom that was coming out of World War II. I think that if they had come in with the same kind of verve and knowledge and experience with the people side of things, who knows how successful they would have been.
Well, it's to talk about the end of World War II, which is support for your last comment. I continue to think that one of the 10 best pieces of legislation ever in America is the GI Bill. And, it really we can feel the echoes today, but it was just amazing. And it was really, boy, talk about a step shift from what had been there before. It's just amazing. People didn't go to college before World War II.
Yeah.
You went to Harvard, you went to Yale, and that was about it. And there were some second-rate, state universities, but, and the GI Bill changed it all.
Well, and if we can still kind of pause here on history for a moment, because again, I mentioned before, it's these critical moments, these crises that really galvanize us toward building something. The decade and a half before, FDR was dealing with, the greatest economic impact to our society in the Great Depression. And what did he do? He obviously, a lot of logistics things happened there with the New Deal, but there was a psychological component there that got people feeling better about the opportunities. It gave them hope for something rather than just kind of miring us along in the same kind of depression.
Absolutely. And his fireside chats, the way he held his cigarette and so on, it made you feel just a little bit better, which is really critical.
Absolutely.
And I want to speak out of two sides of my mouth. The one side is it's something that anybody can do. The other side is when I'm hiring and promoting leaders, I want to look for those traits.
Yeah.
One of the people quoted in the book is a guy who heads a pretty big biotech company. And he said, our secret to maintaining our culture is I only hire nice people. And he went on and he said, some of the degrees that you have to have in a biotech company, the name of the degree is not even comprehensible. But he said, I discovered something. You give me the most obscure degree. There are actually a lot of people out there who have it. Hire the nice ones. And, I think, I don't know whether I can put you in the category. Sure as hell can put myself. People who do what I do have not talked enough about hiring and promoting. And talk about strategy and logistics. The two most strategic things and logistics thing a company does is hire and promote. And they always get second billing.
That's incredibly insightful. I have a friend who started a small PR agency. And both in terms of his employees and the clients that he engages with, he has a no a-holes rule.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing, just stated a little differently. So if you were a hiring manager today, Tom Peters, and you were searching out for the nice people among your candidate pool, what's a question or a couple of questions that you might ask them to get to that point to understand if they're nice?
I'm going to answer with two examples. The first one, which I love, two folks whose names I should remember, wrote a book called Management Lessons from the Mayo Clinic. And when we post who are the best healthcare institutions around the country, Mayo almost always comes out on top. So here's one example of what you asked for. You are a real hotshot neurosurgeon, and I'm the Mayo guy who is interviewing you. And we talk for half an hour. And one thing that you don't know is that I got a scorecard. And literally in the course of that half hour, how many times did you use the word we? And how many times did you use the word I? And if the I's beat the we, great credentials, my friend, but you ain't working here. And, I think it's a cool story, but just to really bring it to life, that I thing essentially was started by Dr. Mayo well over 100 years ago. He said, we want to practice team medicine, which God alone knows doesn't happen that much today. So, we versus I is, I've always just gone for that story. And another one, this was a study that came out of the University of Pennsylvania, and they were studying a group which assists the elderly. And pretty technically, they not docs, but people who have to know their way around medically. And they had 70% turnover. And they started asking questions of, who were the people who were turned over, who were the people who did well, and so on. And they developed another hiring criteria. And typical of that hiring criteria is they had a social, a coffee clutch. And, when I'm talking to you, how often do you talk about the neat people you work with? How often do you talk about the fact that you're a Boy Scout leader in your spare time? And they used those criteria as hiring criteria and paid secondary attention to the degree. And one measure, which this does not seem plausible, and I do remember it because it just hit me between the eyes, that turnover went from 70%, 70, to 1.7%.
Wow.
And that's just staggering. And so those kinds of things, questions about community service, I think we can do it across a desk and not a social, but, focus on what the heck you want.
Yeah. I mean, you can always train for skills, but you hire for personality, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And, there's another shortcut that I like. It doesn't always work out, but if you're in, say, a restaurant setting, for example, how does the person treat the wait staff? How does he treat the bus boy? The simple things like this. It comes down to your example about remembering the name of the cleaning woman.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a great quote for this one. This comes from Goethe, who said, "You can easily judge the character of a man by how he treats those who can do nothing for him."
I love it. That is perfection itself.
Yeah.
I can't possibly stand up to Goethe, but the guy who wrote Swimming with the Sharks, Harvey Mackay, who was famous for a while, his version of that was he took you as a candidate to a Minnesota Twins baseball game. And same thing. He wanted to see how, when the popcorn guy came by, he wanted to see how you dealt with the popcorn guy.
Yeah.
And it's, not quite up to the classic standards, but it's a nice analogy.
Well, I think what it speaks to is, again, the universality of this stuff, the human nature that we're talking about. And I think what you've done here, Tom, with the Tom Peters Compact Guide to Excellence is we get a hefty dose of Tom Peters in here, but you also borrow from the greats along the way. I mean, there are so many. We haven't even scratched the surface on this thing yet. This is just, to me, this is going to sit. I have a bookshelf right next to me here in my office. This is going to sit right on that shelf where it's in easy reach, because I think it's something that will come in handy for me. It should come in handy to anyone who is interested in any facet, not only of leadership, but of relationships, of getting along with people, and quite frankly, doing your part to making the world a better place.
A bit better. Yeah, that's obviously our goal, our hope, our prayer. And this really is the last one.
Well, Tom Peters, I'm not going to hold you to that, because I know you always are full of surprises, but thank you for making the world a better place in the very significant ways that you have. And thank you for joining us here on Timeless Leadership.
Well, it's my great pleasure. And you are doing precisely the same thing that I'm doing. Your biases are the right biases. And so it is a great pleasure for me to have invested an hour in our conversation. It was terrific.
When you prioritize people over everything else, you're bound to succeed. And when you make excellence your life's mission, you'll improve the lives of everyone around you. Thank you for joining us and for being an advocate for timeless and principled leadership, whenever and wherever you find it. I'm Scott Monty. Until next time, may you dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, for you are a leader.